The envelope slid across the glass table and stopped right in front of me. It was thick, heavy, and sealed with a company stamp. I did not open it. I already knew what was inside. Across from me sat Elena Rostova, our HR director, and Julian Hayes, the senior vice president of operations. The room was cold, sterile, and smelled like dry erase markers and stale coffee. Julian leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and looked at me like I was a broken piece of machinery. Elena cleared her throat, looked me straight in the eye, and spoke the words I would never forget. "Arthur, after 15 years, we have to be honest. Loyalty doesn't matter in a growth model. We need agility." The sentence landed like a hammer. I felt my chest tighten, but my face did not change. I kept my hands flat on the table and breathed in slow. I am 48 years old. I have a mortgage with 12 years left on a house my wife and I paid for together. My daughter's first college tuition payment is due in August. For 15 years, I have missed family dinners, canceled weekend trips, and answered phone calls at 2 in the morning. I did it because I believed in the work. I did it because I thought my loyalty meant something to the people who built the company. Now it was sitting on the table as a single line item on a budget sheet. Agility, I repeated just to hear the word out loud. My official title is Director of Supply Chain Compliance. That sounds impressive on paper, but the real job is much simpler. I keep the trucks moving. I keep the warehouses from freezing. I make sure the hazardous materials cross state lines without breaking federal law. Without me, the whole machine stops turning. But they did not see that. They saw a number that needed to be cut to make the quarterly report look clean for the investors. I picked up the pen. The metal felt cold against my fingers. I signed the separation agreement at the bottom line. The scratch of the ink sounded too loud in the quiet room. Elena handed me the envelope again. I slid it into my coat pocket, stood up, and walked out of the conference room without a word. I kept my shoulders back. I kept my head up. I did not cry. I did not yell. I just felt the heavy, quiet weight of survival pressing down on my chest. The numbers in my head started adding up fast. The mortgage, the tuition, the medical bills, the sudden loss of my health insurance. All it was real. All of it was mine to handle. The elevator ride down to the parking garage felt long. When the doors opened, the cool evening air hit my face. I walked to my car and stood there for a moment, watching the rain drip off the concrete overhang. The company badge in my pocket felt like dead weight. I took it out, looked at my face on the plastic card, and realized I was holding a souvenir from a place that had already written me off. I dropped the badge in the trash bin near the driver's door. I turned the key in the ignition and let the engine warm up. I did not know what I would do next, but I knew one thing for certain. I was done carrying people who refused to carry me. The silence in the car felt heavy, but it was honest. And for the first time in 15 years, I finally understood how much power I actually held. They thought they were cutting a cost. They did not realize they were pulling the foundation out from under their own house. People always assume a job like mine is about spreadsheets and boardroom meetings. It is not. For 15 years, my real office was a mix of dusty server rooms, echoing loading docks, and cramped compliance offices near the freight terminals. I did not wear suits to pitch ideas to investors. I wore steel-toed boots to walk the warehouse floor and make sure the routing software was actually matching the physical freight. I built the vendor tracking system from scratch when the old one kept crashing. I sat across from freight brokers, chemical suppliers, and regional haulers until they trusted me enough to sign contracts on the back of a clipboard. I memorized the federal deadlines for moving restricted materials across state lines because missing a single day meant massive fines, delayed shipments, and lawsuits. Most days the work was quiet, but quiet does not mean easy. I spent years covering for leadership mistakes so the executives could keep their titles. When a manager approved a shipment without checking the weight limits, I stayed up all night rerouting the freight and calling 3 different terminals to avoid a federal audit. When a vendor missed a critical delivery window, I used my personal cell phone to negotiate a rush fee that kept our clients from walking away. I absorbed every late-night emergency, every angry client call, and every system failure. I took the stress so the people upstairs could sleep through the night. I thought that was just part of the job. I thought being reliable meant holding the line when everyone else wanted to quit. I had a family depending on that line. My wife, Sarah, was in the middle of long-term physical therapy after a car accident 2 years prior. Her insurance covered most of it, but not the specialized equipment or the home care we needed on weekends. My father was 82 and required regular checkups and prescription coordination. I worked myself into the floor because I believed that if I did my job right, the company would always be there for us. I believed that competence earned respect. I was wrong. The truth is, I never told anyone how fragile our operation really was. The entire supply chain ran on manual overrides, custom vendor codes, and legacy routing tables that only existed in my head and my personal files. The compliance software we use for our top 3 enterprise accounts require my direct digital signature every single month. Federal law tied those reports to my certification number. If my signature disappeared, the reports became invalid. If the reports became invalid, the contracts broke. I never warned the board about this because I assumed they already knew. I assumed they understood that the shiny presentations and quarterly growth charts were only possible because of the invisible work happening in the background. They treated my presence like a utility, like electricity or running water. You only notice it when it disappears. But they never saw the pipes. They never saw the valves. They never saw the years of late nights and weekend calls that kept everything flowing. When the new leadership team talked about modernization and digital transformation, I listened quietly. I watched them point to screens and nod at each other. They believed technology could replace human judgment. They believed a glossy dashboard could understand 15 years of handshake agreements, penalty clauses, and client-specific routing rules. I sat back and watched them build a plan that would only work if everything stayed exactly as I left it. I did not correct them. I just kept signing the forms, answering the calls, and holding the machine together. I was tired, but I was still professional. I still showed up. I still delivered. I did not realize that the moment they called loyalty a liability, I had already become a ghost. The system was still running, but the hands that kept it alive were already gone. The new COO arrived on a Tuesday morning. His name was Marcus Vale. He was 32 years old, wore tailored suits that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and spoke in smooth, polished phrases that sounded like they came from a business school textbook. He had an Ivy League MBA, a confident smile, and a way of nodding at people that made them feel seen without actually listening to a word they said. I was introduced to him in a staff meeting the following week. He shook my hand, looked past my shoulder at someone more important, and said, "Arthur, I've heard great things about your institutional knowledge. We'll lean on that during the transition." He never asked what that knowledge actually was. He never asked how the system worked. He just assumed it would work for him because it always had. 2 days later, HR called me back into the same glass-walled conference room. Elena sat across from me again, but this time Julian was not there. Instead, Marcus stood by the window, scrolling on his phone. Elena slid a new document across the table. "Arthur, we're restructuring your role to better align with our growth strategy. You'll be moving into a strategic advisory position. This allows you to focus on high-level guidance while the new operations team handles day-to-day execution." I read the paper. My salary was cut by 60%. My direct access to clients was removed. I was told to shadow the new leadership team and provide mentorship when asked. They handed me a new badge and a new desk assignment, an open workstation in a hallway near the fire exit, with no window and no privacy. I did not argue. I did not ask why. I just nodded, signed the paper, and took the new badge. The plastic felt cheap in my hand. As I walked back to my old office to pack my personal items, I watched Marcus and his team celebrate in the conference room I had just left. They were laughing, clinking coffee cups, talking about synergy and disruption. I quietly boxed my framed photos, my favorite pen, and the small plant my daughter gave me for Father's Day. I realized this was not a transition. It was a slow, polite push out the door. They wanted me gone, but they did not want the legal risk of firing me outright. So they made my job so small, so meaningless, that I would have no choice but to leave on my own. New information surfaced that week. I overheard a conversation between Marcus and the CFO in the break room. The board had approved this restructuring not to fix operations, but to impress a new round of investors. They wanted to show a modernized leadership team with fresh perspectives. Marcus planned to replace my custom vendor portals with a glossy new software platform called Nexus Flow. The rollout timeline was 90 days. I knew that software could not read 15 years of handshake deals, compliance exceptions, and penalty clauses. It could not understand why vendor A needed a 2-day grace period on hazardous shipments, or why client B required a manual override every quarter for regulatory audits. But Marcus did not care. He believed the dashboard would fix everything. I watched him approve the purchase order with a single click. I watched the celebration continue, and I quietly finished packing my box. The pressure tightened in my chest, but it was not fear anymore. It was clarity. I had hit the wall of my own patience. My internal voice shifted. I was no longer the loyal employee trying to save the company from itself. I was a clear-eyed observer, watching a train leave the tracks in slow motion. That night, I made a decision that changed everything. I stopped doing the invisible work. I did not sabotage anything. I did not break any rules. I did not delete files or send angry emails. I simply stopped propping up a house that had already decided it did not want me inside. The emotional shift was quiet but powerful. I felt a calm resolution settle over me, like the moment you stop fighting a current and let it carry you somewhere new. I spent the next few days mapping out exactly what I controlled and what I could legally step away from. I reviewed my original employment contract, the separation paperwork I had signed, and the compliance manuals I had written myself. I realized 3 major vendor auto-renewals were scheduled for the following month. Each one required my manual approval to avoid triggering penalty rates. Without my signature, the contracts would default to expensive short-term terms that would blow the new budget. I also learned that the service-level agreements for Titan Core Industries, our largest client, legally required my direct signature on monthly compliance reports. Federal regulations tied those reports to my certification number. If my name was not on the document, the report was invalid. If the report was invalid, Titan Core could terminate the contract with 0 penalty. I checked the software migration plan Marcus had approved. There was no backup protocol for legacy routing codes, no fallback system for manual overrides, no contingency plan for the dozens of small, human-dependent processes that kept the machine running. The entire rollout assumed everything would work perfectly on the first try. I knew better, but I did not warn them. I did not send a memo. I just documented everything for myself. I filed the paperwork to quietly register my own consulting LLC. I saved my personal notes, client contact lists, and system maps to a private, encrypted drive. I did not take any company property. I did not copy proprietary code or steal client lists. I only took what lived in my memory and my experience. The relationships, the patterns, the unwritten rules that no software could replicate. The pressure built as Marcus pushed forward with his shiny new system. He held town halls, sent enthusiastic emails, and celebrated small milestones. He was completely unaware of the structural cracks underneath. I watched him approve the first phase of the Nexus Flow rollout with a confident smile. I watched the team cheer, and I quietly prepared for the moment the foundation would give way. My tone stayed mature and measured. I focused on facts, legal boundaries, and the quiet dignity of walking away from a losing fight. I was not angry anymore. I was ready. The handover was coming, and with it, the first signs of reality hitting the company. My last day arrived on a Friday afternoon. The office felt quieter than usual, like everyone knew something was ending, but did not want to say it out loud. I left my desk completely clean. No personal items, no sticky notes, no hidden files. I handed over a thin binder labeled Transition Guide to the new operations lead, a young analyst named Derek who had never worked a warehouse shift in his life. The binder was legally complete. It had all the required forms, the official process maps, and the compliance checklists. But it was deliberately stripped of the unwritten knowledge, the personal relationships, and the override protocols I always used to fix emergencies. I did not feel guilty about that. I felt professional. I had given them everything the contract required. Anything more would have been a gift. And I was done giving gifts to people who did not value them. I walked out of the building at 4:30. The sky was gray and the air smelled like rain. I drove home in silence, turned off my work phone, and placed it in a drawer. For the first time in 15 years, I did not check my email after hours. I did not answer a call from a worried vendor. I did not troubleshoot a routing error. I sat at my kitchen table, poured a cup of coffee, and opened a morning newspaper. My wife, Sarah, walked in and sat across from me. She did not ask what happened. She just placed her hand over mine and squeezed. That was enough. By Monday morning, the first cracks appeared. My personal phone buzzed with a text from a former colleague, Lena, who still worked in logistics. Hey Arthur, quick question. Do you know why the regional distributor in Ohio is getting hit with new routing penalties? The system says it's automatic, but the contract says otherwise. I read the message. I knew the answer. The new software did not recognize the grandfather clause I had negotiated 5 years ago. But I did not reply. I just set the phone down and kept drinking my coffee. An hour later, an email popped up in my personal account from a compliance officer I used to mentor. Arthur, hope you're well. Quick ask. The vendor approval signatures for Q3 are missing from the portal. Was there a system update I missed? I knew there was no system update. I knew the signatures were missing because the new platform could not process the legacy format. I knew the officer was panicking because the deadline was 48 hours away. But I did not answer. I let the email sit. I let the pressure build. Around noon, my old work number flashed on my screen. It was Marcus, the young COO. I watched the phone ring. Once, twice, 10 times. Then it went to voicemail. I did not listen to the message. I did not call back. I just turned the phone face down and opened a new browser tab. I read an article about supply chain resilience. I took a slow sip of coffee. I felt no guilt, no anger, no satisfaction, just calm certainty. I knew what was coming next. New information surfaced that afternoon through industry group chats and quiet messages from former colleagues. The new Nexus Flow software had already failed its first stress test. It tried to force legacy routing codes into the new platform and crashed. Urgent freight meant for the Midwest hub got routed to the wrong regional terminal. Trucks sat idle. Dock managers called in overtime. The internal help desk was flooded with tickets. Small errors compounded into expensive delays. The pressure multiplied, but I was not causing the damage. I was just no longer stopping it from happening. The system I built could not run on autopilot. It needed a human hand, and that hand was no longer on the wheel. The emotional weight was not joy. It was quiet realization. A machine built on one man's loyalty cannot run without him. And now, the company was learning that lesson the hard way. The crisis hit exactly as I expected. Late Monday afternoon, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a notification from an industry news feed. Titan Core Industries, the company's largest account and 40% of total revenue, had sent a formal notice. They were terminating their contract. The reason was clear and brutal. 3 missed compliance windows, delayed freight, and a breach of their service-level agreement that required direct oversight from a certified operations director. I read the notice twice. Then I set the phone down and looked out the window. The sky was darkening. Streetlights flickered on. Inside the old company, I imagined the panic spreading like a wave. The emotional beat inside that building was pure, raw panic. The CEO and COO realized the account was gone. They tried to call Titan Core's legal team. They got no answers. They sent urgent emails. They requested emergency meetings. But Titan Core's contract had a strict 96-hour performance window. Once triggered, they could legally walk with zero penalty. The company had ignored that clause during the restructuring because they believed the new software would prevent any issues. They were wrong. Internal servers crashed when the routing system tried to force legacy codes into the new platform. The warehouse floor stopped moving. Trucks sat idle at loading docks. Forklifts powered down. The silence on the floor was louder than any alarm. I watched it unfold through quiet updates from former colleagues who still respected me. Lena texted, "Arthur, the floor is dead. Marcus is yelling. The board is on emergency call." Another message, "They're trying to rebuild the old routing tables, but no one knows the codes." I did not reply. I just read. I observed. I let the reality settle. The narrator's voice stayed calm and observational. I described the exact moment the company realized they broke the machine. Not with a bang, not with a scandal, but with a slow, inevitable collapse of trust, process, and competence. The pressure peaked as the board received emergency reports. The numbers were bad. Revenue projections for the quarter dropped by half. Investor calls were postponed. The market reacted fast. Competitors who had watched our Titan Core contract for years suddenly reached out to their own legal teams. They knew an opportunity when they saw one. I did not celebrate. I did not gloat. I just felt the heavy reality of broken trust. Titan Core had been with the company for 12 years. They stayed because they trusted me. They trusted my signature. They trusted my word. When that trust disappeared, they left. No drama. No threats. Just a clean, legal exit. That night, I sat with Sarah at the kitchen table. We talked about practical things. The mortgage, the tuition, the next steps. I did not tell her every detail. She did not ask. She just listened. Then she said, "You did your job. They chose not to see it. That's on them, not you." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. I nodded. I felt the last bit of guilt I had been carrying finally lift. I was not responsible for their choices. I was only responsible for mine. And my choice was to walk away with my head up, my records clean, and my integrity intact. The collapse was not my doing. It was the natural consequence of a system that valued buzzwords over bones. And now the bill had come due. The phone started ringing again 2 days later. This time, it was HR. Elena's name flashed on my personal screen. I let it ring. Then it was the CEO. Then it was Marcus. The tone was not smooth anymore. It was tight, rushed, and desperate. I answered the fourth call. Elena's voice was different now. No corporate polish. No rehearsed lines. Just panic. "Arthur, we need to talk. Can you come in?" I sat at my kitchen table, looking out at the quiet street. "I'm listening," I said. She started talking fast. They wanted me back. They offered double my old salary. They offered my title back. They even suggested reversing the separation agreement, wiping the last month from the record. I listened quietly. I took notes on a legal pad. I did not interrupt. When she finished, I spoke only in facts. "Elena, I signed the paperwork you gave me. You signed it too. The system you dismantled required my direct involvement. You chose to replace that with software that could not handle the work. I gave 15 years to that company. You call my loyalty a liability. I'm not the problem here. The problem is a plan that ignored reality." There was silence on the other end. Then Marcus got on the line. His voice was strained. "Arthur, we can fix this. Just tell us what you need." I reminded him of the vendor auto renewals that now carried penalty rates. I reminded him of the Titan Core contract that was gone because of miscompliance windows. I reminded him that I had warned no one because I was told to focus on high-level guidance. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse. I just stated what was true. He had no answer. New information came out that week. The board had forced an emergency audit. The numbers were now public to the investors. Revenue projections were cut in half. The young COO, Marcus, was placed on administrative leave pending review. The market reacted fast. Competitors who had watched our Titan Core contract for years suddenly reached out to me. One call came from a stable, well-run competitor in the same space. Their CEO, a woman named Diane Cho, spoke plainly. "Arthur, we've watched your work for years. We have a need for senior compliance leadership. No buzzwords, no restructuring, just real work. Are you interested?" I did not celebrate. I did not gloat. I simply took 2 meetings. I reviewed their contracts. I asked about their operational culture. I met their team. Then I signed on as a senior compliance advisor. The paperwork was clean. The terms were fair. The respect was immediate. The pressure shifted entirely to the old company. They realized the damage was permanent. Titan Core was not coming back. The vendor penalties were eating their margin. The new software was still failing basic stress tests. Investors were asking hard questions. The board was in damage control mode. I watched it unfold from a distance, through industry updates and quiet messages. I felt no joy at their pain. I felt relief in my own peace. My tone stayed mature, unbothered, and legally clean. I focused on my new work, my family, and the quiet satisfaction of a job done right. The language remained simple and direct. Phone calls, signed documents, quiet phone screens. The heavy silence of a corporate house built on buzzwords finally collapsing under its own weight. The reckoning was not dramatic. It was inevitable, and I was no longer inside the building when the walls fell. The dust settled. I work now from a small, quiet office with a glass window. My new schedule is strict. I start at 8. I finish at 5. I do not answer emails after hours. My family is safe. The mortgage is being paid down faster than I planned. My daughter's tuition is covered for the year. My father's care is handled without stress. The old company shrinks, restructures, and survives at half its former size. I read about it in industry briefs. No drama, no headlines, just the slow, quiet adjustment of a machine that lost its core. I do not feel joy at their pain. I feel peace of my own. The emotional beat is quiet closure and hard-earned wisdom. The final conflict was internal, letting go of the guilt I carried for years and accepting that loyalty must be mutual. I reflect on the real lesson. Competence without respect is just a slow trap. You could be the most capable person in the room, but if the room decides your value is 0, you walk out. My voice stays calm, masculine, and deeply reflective. The language remains simple, clear, and grounded in everyday reality. I remember the exact moment I realized I did not miss the job. I only missed the version of myself who still believed in it. That version thought hard work alone would be seen. That version thought loyalty would be rewarded. That version was young, hopeful, and naive. I'm not that man anymore. I am older, wiser, stronger. I know my worth now, and I will never give it away for a title, a paycheck, or empty praise. The section ends with me closing my laptop, locking my office door, and stepping into a quiet evening. The air is cool. The streetlights are on. I walk to my car, put the key in the ignition, and drive home. I know I will never confuse my work with my worth again. The story closes on a steady, satisfying note. Justice was not served with anger or revenge. It was earned through patience, preparation, and quiet strength. And that is a lesson worth telling.